My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 35 years old, and 6 months ago, my entire life went up in flames. My husband, David, wasn't just unfaithful, he fathered a child with another woman while I was still wearing his ring. In the courtroom, he had the audacity to ask for most of what we built together, smiling like betrayal was a business deal. I walked out with a single apartment and a settlement check. People called me lucky, but when the laughter of my own family joined the echo of his betrayal, I knew luck had nothing to do with it. My younger sister Sophie leaned close at a barbecue, her wine glass tilted, her smirk cutting deeper than any blade. "How does it feel to be the loser here?" she said loud enough for everyone to hear. I smiled back cold and steady. They thought I was broken, but what they didn't know was that I had already chosen my weapon. Before I go any further, I want to pause for just a second. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing the different cities and countries pop up. And if you've ever felt betrayed by your own family, hit that like button right now. Trust me, you're not alone. Make sure you subscribe too, because these kinds of stories, they get darker, messier, and more personal than you can imagine. The more of us share them, the more we realize how common family betrayal really is. Now, let's get back to my story. I grew up in a house where noise meant love. At least that's what I told myself. The dishwasher rattled like a train, the TV hummed through sitcom laugh tracks, and my mother's voice lifted over it all. "Sophie, honey, eat another bite." Steam fogged the kitchen windows in winter, turning the glass into a blurry watercolor of our street. I sat at the table with my knees pressed together, watching the plate in front of me cool. Mom set the last spoonful of mashed potatoes onto Sophie's plate without looking at mine. When I cleared my throat, she glanced over, startled. "Oh, Clara, you're fine. You like things plain." Dad leaned back, tapped the salt shaker against his knuckles, and smiled at my sister. "Our little star needs fuel. Big rehearsal tomorrow." He said it like an announcement, a headline. Sophie, two braids and a gap-toothed grin, swung her legs under the chair. The chair thumped. Thump, thump, thump. I felt each sound in my chest. "I made the team, too," I said. My voice came out quiet, like I was talking through a scarf. Dad nodded, but didn't ask which team. Mom ruffled Sophie's hair and reached for the gravy boat. The kitchen smelled like onions and dish soap, like Sunday routines. I swallowed whatever else I'd planned to say and cut into the meatloaf, the outer edge gone cold and tough. At the church basement, potluck, the tables were laid end to end, covered in plastic gingham. Women from the congregation moved like a choreography they'd practiced for years. Spoon smile. "How's your mother?" The coffee was bitter and burned. The punch tasted like melted popsicles. I waited my turn for the strawberry pie, watching the knife fall slice by slice. When it came to Sophie, the server scooped an extra red corner thick with fruit. When it came to me, the ladle knocked against an empty pie tin. "Sorry, sweetie," the woman said. "We'll have cookies later." My father laughed softly. "Be the big sister, Clara. You know how it goes." I did. I knew too well. I learned to be full on apologies. In middle school, I won the district science fair with a hand-built, badly painted model of a solar still that turned muddy water clear. My poster board smelled like permanent marker and desperation. I wore a sweater Mom said was nice for a school thing, and when they called my name, I looked through the crowd for my parents. Dad had promised to come after work. Mom after dropping off Sophie at dance. I found Mom near the exit sneakers, squeaking on the gym floor, coat half on. She waved. "We need to go, honey," she said when I reached her medal hanging cold against my throat. "Sophie's recital starts at 6. Let's not make her late." She pulled me into a quick side hug. "I'm proud of you, truly. Now grab your things." At Christmas, the house smelled like pine sap and cinnamon. Dad strung lights while cursing under his breath. The tree leaned, our tree always leaned, so he tucked a folded TV guide under one leg of the stand. On Christmas morning, I pressed my palm to the cold window while snow whispered down. Sophie tore through wrapping paper like a small animal squealing over a new pink bike, a tape player brand name Jeans. I unwrapped a knit hat, a used paperback with someone else's notes in the margins, and a coupon book Mom had handwritten, "One movie night with popcorn. 1 day off chores, sweet and cheap and paper thin." "You're so practical, Clara," Mom said. "You never ask for much. That was the trick." You could never accuse someone of withholding if you trained yourself to want less. When I was 16, I got a job at Martin's Grocery. My hands smelled like citrus rinds and freezer burn. After shifts, I walked home under streetlights that hummed. I tucked my pay into a mason jar marked college. Dad peered in at the folded bills. "We're proud of your discipline," he said. "Just remember, we're one family. When your sister needs help, we help." A month later, the jar was lighter. Mom smiled apologetically. "Cheer camp," she said, sliding a brochure across the counter with a photo of perfect teeth and perfect ponytails. "She'll remember this forever." I remembered it too. The brochure paper was glossy, the kind that reflects your face back at you warped. At the time, I didn't know I could say no. I didn't know I was allowed to take up space to say I earned that. I pocketed the receipt anyway, folded it into a square until the ink bled and the edges softened. Years later, that small square would become something else. Proof of a pattern. A key. College was a concrete campus by a river that looked brown even in summer. I left on a Sunday with a duffel bag, Mom's casserole in foil, and Dad's advice: be smart, be careful, and don't make waves. Sophie cried theatrically on the porch. "I'll miss you." She looked perfect in a way that photographs loved. I hugged her and tried to catch the smell of home to take with me dryer sheets, dog fur coffee, the faint crispness of my mother's perfume. At school, I learned to code long before I learned to like myself. I sat in windowless computer labs at midnight, the glow of monitors painting everyone the same shade of pale. Algorithms made sense, families didn't. I got scholarships, took extra credits, graduated early. My parents came to commencement with a card and a check for $50, apologizing that money was tight because of Sophie's study abroad. Sophie posted blurry pictures from Rome Cobblestone's Gelato, a boy with a motorcycle captioned with hearts and the word blessed. That summer, I took a job in a converted warehouse where the AC rattled and pigeons lived in the rafters. The boss wore cargo shorts year-round. The coffee tasted like cardboard. I learned to fix other people's messes. I was good at it. When Sophie called crying because her roommate just didn't vibe anymore, I drove across town to help move boxes. When she asked if I would co-sign a lease for just 6 months, I said yes because Dad's voice was in my ear. "We're one family." In the leasing office, a woman slid papers toward us. I signed my name looking softer than I felt. I didn't know it then, but that signature would become a lever someone else would pull. I met David at a diner with cracked red booths and a neon sign that buzzed even at noon. Rain pressed against the windows. He wiped his feet on the mat and flashed a smile that made the waitress call him sweetheart without thinking about it. He was older by 2 years, with a tie loosened like he'd just escaped something. "I'm not much of a coffee person," he said, ordering coffee. He told me he was in sales, that he loved old movies, that he'd never met anyone who ate pancakes for dinner. He made me feel like a choice, not a chore. We talked until the waitress stacked chairs on tables and the cook yelled that he was going to kill the lights. Outside, the rain had turned the parking lot into a mirror. He held his jacket over my head like a roof. I stood under it and let myself believe in warmth. When he proposed, it was without a ring. "We'll pick one together, something you really want, and without witnesses." "I don't need a crowd," he said. "I need you." We went to the courthouse on a Wednesday, brought cupcakes back to my desk, and told people at work. My mother cried on the phone happy tears and asked about dates and dresses, and whether Sophie could sing something at the reception we weren't having. "We'll do a family dinner," I promised. Small, just us. Dad said, "A man who knows what he wants, that's a good sign." Sophie mailed us a card with a lipstick kiss on the flap. "Don't forget your little sister when you're rich and boring," she wrote inside a joke that didn't feel like a joke. Our first apartment together was on the 3rd floor of a building where the hallway always smelled like frying onions and laundry. The faucet whined if you turned it too fast. At night, I lay awake listening to the city, a siren slicing the dark. Someone laughing on the sidewalk, the building settling with tiny creaks, like old bones. I told myself I loved the flaws because they made it real. We bought a second-hand couch, a crooked bookshelf, a rug with a coffee stain we pretended not to notice. David carried me over the threshold like the movies, bumped my shoulder against the doorframe, and we both laughed. For a while it was easy. We learned each other's rhythms, my habit of rolling socks in pairs, his habit of leaving the cereal box open like he believed in magic. Then came the after-hours drinks, the just one more meeting, the lit screen turned face down. When I asked, he kissed my forehead and said, "Babe, don't be that person." He smelled like a bar at 10 p.m. Citrus rind twisted on wet wood, a sweetness that wasn't mine. I told myself he was networking. I told myself I was paranoid. I told myself stories because I had always been good at them, tidy, believable, safe. Family dinners didn't change. Mom's kitchen still steamed in winter. Dad still tapped the salt shaker. Sophie still had a spotlight that followed her around. Ethan took me to a rooftop concert, she said one night, and Mom clasped her hands like she'd heard a proposal. Clara, Dad said, "How's work?" I opened my mouth, but Sophie jumped in. "She's basically a genius. She stares at numbers and makes money appear." Everyone laughed and moved on. After dessert, Dad walked me to the door. "You know your sister looks up to you," he said. He said it like a consolation prize. He said it like it should erase every small hunger I had learned to ignore. I didn't know it then, but every favor I said yes to was quietly picking the locks to my future. The door would open much later with a sound like a laugh and a fall like a long, long stare. The first real crack showed on a rainy Tuesday in March. David had been coming home later, and later the air on his clothes sharp with whiskey and something floral I didn't own. That night, he dropped his keys into the bowl by the door, kissed my cheek like a man clocking in, and went straight to the shower. I sat at the kitchen table with a grocery receipt crumpled in my hand, staring at the condensation crawling down my glass of water. I wanted to believe him when he said work was demanding that his team needed him. But when his phone lit up on the counter, the name flashing Melissa with a heart, my chest tightened. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The truth already throbbed like a bruise. I thought about telling Mom. I thought about driving to their house, knocking on the door, collapsing into her arms like I was 16 again. But I knew what would happen. She would say, "Marriage is hard, Clara. Don't be dramatic." She'd ask if I was giving him enough attention, enough support. She'd tell me to be patient the way she always told me when Sophie broke something of mine and I wanted it replaced. So I kept it to myself. I swallowed the taste of iron in my mouth and went to bed alone. Weeks later, when I finally confronted David, he didn't deny it. He leaned against the kitchen counter, arms, crossed eyes flat. It didn't mean anything he said. I was stupid. I'll fix it. But by then, the mistress wasn't just a mistress. She was pregnant. My hands shook on the countertop, the laminate peeling at the edges. "You're going to be a father," I whispered, though it sounded like I was telling myself. He didn't argue. He just said he had to do the right thing. The divorce was fast, vicious, and public. Courtrooms smell like stale air and cold metal. The judge's bench loomed like a stage, and David performed well. He painted himself as a man, starting over a man burdened with responsibility. His lawyer said words like equitable and future obligations. I sat there, palms damp, thinking about all the nights I had waited for him to come home. My lawyer, assigned overworked, looked tired of my story before I finished telling it. Still, the judge saw enough. I left with our apartment and a settlement check, though David tried to reach for more. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt both stripped and armed. I had less than I wanted, but at least I had something that was mine. Back at the apartment, the walls echoed. The closet looked like a mouth missing teeth, his clothes gone. I boxed up the rest of his things, razors, cufflinks, that stupid mug, with "World's Best Closer" written in bold red letters. I shoved them into black trash bags and left them by the door. The smell of him lingered aftershave bourbon betrayal. I opened every window, even though the rain blew sideways. The curtains slapped against the frames like angry hands. That was the first night I couldn't stop shaking. I sat cross-legged on the living room floor, the rug scratching my skin, trying to breathe. My phone screen blurred with missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, lawyers, debt collectors maybe. I thought I'd cave in. Instead, I dialed a number I'd scribbled from a flyer at the library, Dr. Helen Morales Counseling Services. Her office smelled of lavender and ink. She wore glasses that caught the light like shields. "Tell me what you're most afraid of," she said, pen poised. The words spilled out that I was disposable, that I was forgettable, that I'd been raised to believe my role was to serve. She nodded once. Then we'll work on unlearning that. For a while, I cut my family out. Calls went unanswered, texts ignored. I lived in silence, eating takeout cartons on the floor, working remote until my eyes burned. It was easier than pretending I wasn't broken. But loneliness has a way of seeping in. Eventually, I picked up when Mom called. Her voice was sweet, rehearsed. "We're having Sunday dinner. Everyone will be there. Just come, Clara. It's family." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The drive to my parents' house was like driving backward in time. The cracked driveway, the oak tree we carved initials into the porch light glowing too yellow. Inside, everything was familiar and wrong at the same time. Sophie was on the couch, her hand intertwined with Ethan's, laughing too loudly. Mom fussed with plates. Dad carved roast beef like it was a holiday. For a while, I let myself pretend nothing had changed. The smells, gravy, garlic bread, lemon cleaner wrapped around me like a blanket. Then Mom set down her fork. "Clara, what are you doing with your apartment?" she asked too casually. My stomach tightened. "I'm thinking of buying a house," I said, careful. "I'll rent the apartment out to cover the mortgage." Mom and Dad shared a look. Sophie leaned forward, eyes wide. Or Mom said quickly Sophie and Ethan could move in. Just until they get on their feet. It would help them save for the wedding. The fork clattered from my hand. For free. They'd pay utilities, Dad added, like that was generous. Sophie's eyes filled with practiced desperation. "Please, Clara, rent is impossible right now. We really need this." The room pressed in on me. The ticking clock, the smell of roast cooling the expectant faces. My throat closed around the word no. Instead, I heard myself say, utilities. "That's it." Sophie squealed, hugging me like she'd won a prize. I smiled, but it felt like the smile was carved into stone. Deep down, I knew I'd just made another trade I couldn't afford. I didn't know then how fast they'd turn my generosity into entitlement, how quickly gratitude would sour. I didn't know that the apartment wasn't the only thing they wanted. The day Sophie and Ethan moved into my old apartment, I stood in the doorway like I was watching strangers invade a museum exhibit of my former life. The walls still carried the faint shadow where our wedding photo once hung. The carpet still bore the dent of a coffee table David and I had fought over at IKEA. Sophie twirled through the living room, arms stretched. "It feels bigger than I remembered," she said, her voice echoing off the bare walls. Ethan dropped a box with a grunt, already staking out a corner for his gaming setup. They brought flowers, cheap supermarket daisies wrapped in cellophane. "We'll take good care of it," Sophie promised, clutching my hand with sticky enthusiasm. I nodded, slipping the spare keys into her palm. The metal felt heavy colder than it should have. At first, I tried to believe it would work. I closed on a new house in a quiet neighborhood, 3 bedrooms, a backyard, that smelled of cut grass and possibility. I painted the spare rooms soft blue and set up my home office. Mornings began with coffee and the sound of sparrows. It should have felt like freedom. But every time Sophie texted me about little improvements, new curtains, a string of fairy lights, a plant on the windowsill, it felt like she was planting flags, claiming territory that was never hers. Then, the bills started coming late. The electric company called me directly. "Balance overdue." I texted Sophie, trying to keep it polite. She replied with emojis, a breezy, "Oops, sorry, things are tight this month." A week later, I saw her Instagram story dinner at a rooftop restaurant, cocktails glowing under neon lights, Ethan's arm around her waist. Captions, "Living our best life." My jaw clenched so tight it ached. Worse were the posts she tagged me in without asking. "So grateful to my amazing sister for making this possible," she gushed, posing in the apartment with Ethan. Friends commented, "Wow, Clara, you're so generous." Goals I hadn't given them a gift. I'd given them a loan of space, a chance to breathe. But online, it looked like I was their patron, their sponsor. I felt my stomach turn every time I saw my name in her captions. Family dinners became a battlefield in disguise. Mom would sigh, looking at me over the mashed potatoes. "You're lucky, Clara. Not everyone gets a settlement after divorce. It's a blessing." Dad would nod, adding, "Families help each other. You've always been practical. Your sister dreams big." Sophie would launch into wedding fantasies, champagne fountains, Dove releases floral arches that cost more than my car. Everything's so expensive these days, she'd lament glancing at me. It was less a hint than a demand wrapped in lace. I tried to deflect talking about my job, about coding projects and deadlines. Nobody listened. Their eyes slid back to Sophie, their smiles warming only when she spoke. Finally, one night, I cut through the noise. "I can give you 20,000 for the wedding," I said, my voice flat. The table went silent. Sophie blinked, then laughed incredulously. 20? That barely covers flowers and a decent venue. Mom's face tightened. "Clara, times have changed. You can't compare costs to your little courthouse ceremony." Dad added, "Don't be selfish. You're in a position to help." Selfish. The word lodged in my chest like a shard of glass. Sophie pushed her plate away, tears welling on cue. "I can't believe you'd ruin my dream day like this," she whispered. Ethan rubbed her shoulder, glaring at me as if I'd stolen something precious. The weeks after were a frost. No Sunday dinners, no calls, no texts. Silence became their punishment. At first, I panicked, wondering if I should apologize, offer more. But then I remembered Dr. Morales's voice. "You're not responsible for protecting everyone else from consequences." The quiet began to feel like oxygen. Still at night, I replayed their words, the sting of selfish circling my mind, until it became a drumbeat. One Tuesday, as I sat in my backyard, reading, my phone rang. Sophie's voice shrieked through the speaker. Guess what Ethan proposed? My throat tightened. "Congratulations," I managed. She laughed, breathless. I cried for an hour. "We're planning everything already. Come over Saturday, we need to talk." The dread that filled me was heavy familiar. I already knew what she was going to ask. I just didn't know how public, how ruthless it would become. I didn't know that by the end of summer, the words she used to humiliate me would become the trigger for my coldest smile. Saturday came dressed in sunshine that felt cruel. I parked outside my parents' house, my chest tight, my palms damp. Inside, Sophie and Ethan were surrounded by glossy magazines, pages spread across the coffee table like blueprints for a palace. "Perfect timing," Sophie said, hugging me with arms that smelled faintly of perfume and entitlement. "We're just finalizing details." I sat listening as they dreamed aloud, champagne fountains, three-tiered cakes with fresh flowers, white doves fluttering skyward. Dad nodded like an investor at a pitch meeting, Mom's eyes shimmering with anticipation. Finally, Sophie slid a handwritten budget toward me. My stomach dropped. Venue rental, $15,000. Catering, $25,000. Photography, flowers, decor? Line after line until the total at the bottom screamed $115,000. I couldn't stop myself. "You expect me to pay this." My voice cut through the room. Sophie leaned back, arms crossed, eyes wide with mock innocence. "Of course. You got all that settlement money. It's only fair." "Fair?" I laughed at the sound brittle. "I'll give you 20. That's more than generous." Her face hardened. 20. That's insulting." Tears welled instantly as if she'd rehearsed them. "You're ruining everything." Mom slammed her fork down. "Clara, times have changed. Weddings cost more now. Don't act like you don't have the means." Dad's voice followed low and firm. "Families sacrifice. You're being selfish." The word stung like it always had. Selfish. The label they used whenever I refused to hand over more of myself. My throat burned, but I didn't let them see me flinch. "I've already given enough," I said quietly, pushing the budget back across the table. The silence that followed was sharper than any scream. Sophie burst into sobs, storming upstairs, Ethan trailing behind. Mom and Dad avoided my eyes, their silence as loud as an accusation. I left without another word, clutching my purse like it was armor. Weeks passed with no calls, no Sunday dinners. It was as if I had been erased from the family photo. For a moment, I almost felt relief. Until the invitation came from Lucas, my cousin, for a backyard barbecue. He wrote my name alone on the envelope. Part of me wanted to decline to avoid the collision, but I missed the sound of cousin's laughter, the smell of grilled corn, the freedom of being seen without Sophie's shadow overhead. I went. Lucas's yard buzzed with life. Kids shrieked with water balloons, aunts poured beer into plastic cups, uncles argued over the grill. I was laughing with cousins when Sophie's voice sliced through the air. She stood with a glass of wine, cheeks flushed. "You want to know what I think?" she called out loud enough to hush the crowd. Her finger pointed straight at me. "I think Clara is the real loser here. Her husband left her for another woman. He's raising a kid that isn't hers while she sits in her empty house." Loser. A ripple of laughter and murmurs spread. My mother giggled behind her hand. Dad smirked. My skin burned, my pulse roaring in my ears. For a second, the old me wanted to disappear to swallow it like I always had. But something shifted, cold, steady. I smiled. Not kind, not warm. Cold. "You want to know what it feels like to be the loser," I said, my voice carrying across the silent yard. "It feels pretty good, especially knowing the so-called loser is about to evict you from her apartment." The color drained from Sophie's face. "What?" she whispered. "You heard me." My smile sharpened. "Congratulations on the engagement. I hope you find somewhere else to live." Gasps broke the silence, cousins staring, uncles muttering. Sophie's glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the patio. Mom's face went white. Dad's mouth opened, but no words came. I walked past them, hugged Lucas, and thanked him for the party. Then I left their stunned faces burning in my rearview mirror. That night, my phone lit up missed calls, desperate texts. "Please tell me you're joking. Don't do this to us. We'll talk tomorrow." I set the phone face down and made tea. For the first time in years, the silence didn't suffocate. It tasted like freedom. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The real fallout, the begging, the bargaining, the public unraveling was still to come. And I was ready. The morning after the barbecue, I woke to pounding on my front door. Through the peephole, I saw my entire family lined up like an army mom-dad Sophie, with mascara streaks down her cheeks, Ethan trailing behind like he'd rather be anywhere else. I didn't even let them knock again. I opened the door, leaned on the frame, arms crossed. "Clara, we need to talk," Mom said, voice already trembling with urgency. Inside, the air turned thick. They perched on my couch, leaving me standing. Sophie's voice cracked. "Please tell me you were joking last night. You can't really kick us out." "You humiliated me in front of the entire family," I said evenly. "That was your choice. This is mine." Dad's jaw tightened. "You don't punish family over words spoken in anger." "Funny I said you didn't think it was just words when you laughed." The silence after that stretched until Sophie burst into sobs, clutching Ethan's sleeve. He spoke up hesitant. "Look, I didn't say anything at the party. I don't deserve this." "You chose her," I said, pointing at Sophie. "You share her consequences." That was the first of many visits. For the next 2 weeks, they came in shifts, Mom alone with pies she left untouched, Dad with his lectures about family loyalty, Sophie with her dramatics, Ethan with his careful pleading. Each time I said the same thing. 2 weeks. No more. But they didn't stop at visits. They tried to pull me into the court of public opinion. Sophie posted on Instagram, "Some people just don't understand loyalty. Imagine betraying your own sister when she's planning her wedding." Friends commented with crying emojis, hearts declarations of "you deserve better." I scrolled through, my chest heavy, until I reached Rachel's message. Rachel, my colleague, had seen the post. "You okay?" Want me to say something, I shook my head, texting back, "Don't. Let them play their game. Mine is different." The pressure built. One evening, Mom called, her voice sharp instead of pleading. "Your father and I raised you better. You don't evict family. You raised me to give until I was empty." I snapped. "Not anymore." Click. She hung up without a goodbye. At night, I lay awake, the shadows of my new house stretching long across the walls. Sometimes I questioned myself. Was I cruel? Was I becoming the villain in their story? Then I remembered Sophie's smirk at the barbecue, the way Mom's laugh cut through my shame. I pressed my hands flat against my chest until my heartbeat steadied. This isn't cruelty. This is consequence. 3 days before the deadline, they tried one last stunt. Dad called his voice rehearsed, controlled. "If you go through with this, don't expect us at Thanksgiving. Don't expect Christmas either. You'll be on your own." I've been on my own for years, I said, and hung up. The house was silent after, but in that silence I heard something new, strength steady and undeniable. The deadline loomed like a storm cloud, and every day closer brought another attempt to break me down. On Monday, Sophie showed up alone, clutching a grocery bag like an offering. I brought dinner, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The smell of takeout orange chicken fried rice filled the kitchen. She set it down, eyes wide with fake innocence. Remember when we were kids and I used to beg you to share your fries? You always gave me the last one. You've always been my protector. Don't stop now. I leaned against the counter, arms folded. You don't want a protector. You want a landlord who doesn't collect rent. Her lips trembled. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. She left in tears, abandoning the food. I dumped it into the trash, untouched, the smell of soy sauce clinging to the air long after she was gone. By Wednesday, Ethan tried a different tactic. He came alone, hands shoved deep into his hoodie pocket, shoulders hunched. I know Sophie messed up, he said. She was drunk, angry. She didn't mean what she said. She meant every word I replied. He sighed. Maybe. But do you really want to punish me too? I didn't laugh. I didn't humiliate you. You didn't stop her either. His jaw worked as though he wanted to argue, but he didn't. We don't have savings for another deposit. We've been putting everything into the wedding. If you throw us out, you'll figure it out, I cut in. Like I had to. Like everyone has to. The next night, Mom and Dad came together. They sat stiffly in my living room, the lamplight making their faces look older, harsher. This isn't you, Clara, Mom said. You're vindictive right now, but I know my daughter's heart. You don't know me at all, I said. Dad leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. We're a family. We don't abandon each other. You abandoned me the moment you laughed at Sophie's words, I snapped. The heat in my voice surprised even me. You've been abandoning me since I was a kid. Every time you told me to give to share to sacrifice while Sophie got everything she asked for. This is just the first time I said no. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't look away. They left soon after the door closing with a finality that echoed through the house. Friday night, Rachel called. Saw another post, she said. Your sister's painting you like the villain in some cheap soap opera. People are eating it up. Let them, I said. Rachel was quiet a moment. Then, you're really going to go through with this? Yes. My voice didn't shake. Saturday came the deadline day. I woke early, brewed coffee, sat on the back porch as the sun climbed. At 9, I drove across town and parked across from the apartment. The sight of Sophie and Ethan hauling boxes down the stairs hit me with a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Mom stood nearby, arms crossed, glaring at me from across the street. Dad carried a lamp, awkwardly muttering under his breath. Sophie spotted me. Her face crumpled, then twisted into anger. You're really doing this, she yelled, her voice cracking. Yes, I said, simply loud enough for her to hear. She started to say more, but Ethan pulled her toward the truck, whispering something in her ear. They loaded the last of their belongings, slamming the tailgate shut. The looks they threw at me could have burned through concrete. As the truck rumbled away, I stayed parked, watching until they disappeared around the corner. Then I stepped out, keys in hand. The apartment smelled like dust and faint perfume. Empty. Mine, again. I locked the door behind me and exhaled, my lungs lighter than they had felt in years. But beneath that relief, I felt the tremor of what was coming next. Because people like Sophie didn't just leave quietly. For a week after Sophie and Ethan moved out, I let myself believe it was over. The silence was heavy but almost sweet, like the hush after a storm. I found tenants quickly, a young married couple who paid the deposit without hesitation. They moved in within days, filling the place with laughter and the smell of fresh paint. For the first time in months, the apartment was a source of stability instead of resentment. But peace in my family never lasted. 3 nights later, I opened my laptop and saw Sophie's newest post spread across my feed. A photo of her and Ethan sitting on cardboard boxes, faces staged in misery, captioned, "When your own sister kicks you out before your wedding. Betrayal hurts most when it comes from blood." The comments section burned with sympathy. Friends called me, heartless strangers weighed in with advice Sophie had probably fed them. I closed the laptop, my pulse hammering. The next morning, Dr. Morales noticed my clenched fists as I sat across from her. "You've reclaimed your power," she said. "Now they're trying to steal it back by controlling the narrative. I hate being seen as the villain," I admitted. "Maybe the villain in their story is the hero in yours," she replied. Her words lodged in my chest like an anchor. Still, the smear campaign escalated. Mom posted vague quotes about selfishness and family values. Dad called twice in one night, leaving voicemails sharp as knives. "Do you know what people are saying about us about you? Fix this, Clara. Apologize to your sister." I didn't. Instead, I doubled down. I had Daniel Hayes, someone I'd been seeing casually, a lawyer with sharp eyes and a steadier hand, look over the rental contracts. When he saw the Instagram post, he smirked. "They can cry betrayal online, but on paper, you've done everything right. If they push harder, you're protected." He paused. "But Clara, you need to be ready. People like this don't stop when the law says so." He was right. A week before Sophie's wedding, she showed up on my porch. No tears this time, no pleading. Her dress rehearsal hair and makeup made her look like a stranger. She held a gift bag, shoved it into my hands. Inside was a framed photo of us as kids, both in matching Easter dresses. "We used to love each other," she said flatly. "You ruined that." "No," I answered, setting the frame back into the bag. "You ruined it when you laughed at me, when you treated me like your ATM. I just stopped playing along." Her eyes glittered with rage. "One day you'll regret this." She turned on her heel and left perfume trailing behind her like smoke. That night, I stared at the photo. Two little girls smiling, unaware of what was to come. My chest ached, but I didn't cry. Instead, I wrapped the photo in tissue paper and slid it into the back of my closet. The calls, the posts, the guilt trips, they kept coming, but each time I answered with silence. Silence had once been my prison. Now it was my weapon. When Sophie finally scaled her wedding down to a backyard gathering word filtered back through relatives. "It's not what she wanted," Aunt Carol whispered to me on the phone, "but maybe it's what she needs." I didn't attend, but I saw the photos online, string lights, paper lanterns, 30 people smiling like the pressure had finally broken. For the first time, Sophie looked genuinely happy, not like she was performing for an audience. And me, I sat in my own backyard coffee, warm in my hands, the hum of cicadas in the trees, and felt something settle. Not victory exactly, not forgiveness either. Something colder. Something truer. They had called me selfish my whole life. Maybe selfish was just another word for free. The day of Lucas's barbecue broke hot and airless, the kind of summer heat that clings to your skin and makes every movement feel heavy. I almost didn't go. My stomach twisted as I buttoned my linen shirt fingers, clumsy heart rattling like it wanted out. The invitation had sat on my fridge for weeks, a reminder that family was unavoidable no matter how far I tried to push them. By the time I pulled into Lucas's driveway, laughter and the crackle of a grill drifted over the fence. Kids darted across the lawn with water balloons. The air smelled of charcoal sunblock and cut grass. For a moment, I let myself breathe. Maybe this wouldn't be a battlefield. Maybe I could just be another cousin laughing under string lights. But the illusion cracked the second I saw them. Mom and Dad sat at a picnic table, red Solo cups in their hands, pretending to enjoy the banter of aunts and uncles. Dad's shoulders were stiff, Mom's eyes flicking toward me before darting away. Sophie and Ethan stood near the dessert table, Sophie's hand raised, showing off her engagement ring to a circle of cousins. When her eyes caught mine, her smile faltered, then tightened into something sharp. I told myself to ignore it, to focus on Lucas flipping burgers, on Aunt Carol's too loud laugh, on the sticky sweet smell of barbecue sauce. But tension crawled up my spine. I knew the look in Sophie's eyes. She wasn't going to let me slip through the day unnoticed. Hours passed in fragments. Conversations blurred. Faces swam. I laughed when cousins teased me about work, nodded politely at uncles retelling the same stories. But underneath my chest felt tight, my jaw locked. I could feel Sophie circling like a shark, waiting for the right moment. It came when the sun dipped low, painting the yard gold. I was standing with 3 cousins sipping a beer when Sophie's voice cut through the hum. You want to know what I think she called loud enough that heads turned? My stomach dropped. I turned slowly, beer sweating in my hand. She stood on the patio, wine glass raised like a microphone, her cheeks flushed pink from alcohol or anger or both. I think Clara is the real loser here, she said, her voice ringing across the yard. Conversations froze mid-sentence. The laughter drained away. All eyes shifted to me. Her finger jabbed the air in my direction. Her husband didn't just leave her, he cheated on her, got another woman pregnant and walked away. And what did Clara end up with? An empty house, alone. Pathetic. A ripple of whispers passed through the crowd. Someone chuckled nervously. I saw Mom cover her mouth like she was stifling a laugh. Dad smirked, his eyes gleaming. The blood in my ears roared. My hand tightened around the beer bottle until it groaned. I wanted to disappear, to fold into myself, to let it pass. But something inside me snapped clean and sharp. I set the beer down on the picnic table and walked forward, the grass crunching under my sandals. The crowd parted slightly, anticipation buzzing in the humid air. You want to know what it feels like to be the loser? My voice carried cold and steady. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The stillness made every word hit harder. Sophie smirked, emboldened by the silence around us. Yeah. Tell us, Clara. What's it like to be humiliated, to be replaced? Must sting, huh? I let a smile spread, slow and deliberate. It feels pretty damn good, I said, especially since this so-called loser is about to evict you from her apartment. The effect was instant. Her smirk collapsed. The glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the patio. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A cousin muttered, "Oh my God." Ethan's face drained of color. Sophie's voice cracked. You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm dead serious." I folded my arms. "You've got 2 weeks to find a new place. Enjoy the honeymoon phase, because you'll be moving boxes instead of dancing under chandeliers." Mom stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the patio. "Clara, enough. You don't mean this." I turned to her, my smile colder. I meant every word. "You laughed at me tonight, just like you've laughed at me my entire life. Consider this me laughing back." Dad pushed up from the table, his jaw tight. "You're vindictive, Clara. This isn't who you are. Maybe you never knew who I was," I said. "You just knew who you wanted me to be, quiet, obedient, generous, until I was bled dry." The silence that followed was suffocating. Relatives shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between us. Sophie's tears spilled, streaking her makeup. "You're ruining my life," she sobbed. "My wedding, my future, everything." "No," I said, stepping closer, my shadow cutting across hers. "You ruined your life the second you decided to humiliate me in front of everyone. Actions have consequences. This is yours." She collapsed onto a chair, shaking Ethan's arm around her, but his eyes filled with something like shame. Mom muttered prayers under her breath. Dad stared at me like I'd become a stranger. But I wasn't a stranger. I was finally myself. I turned back to the stunned crowd, forcing a lighter tone. "Thanks for the burgers, Lucas," I said, and hugged him briefly before walking toward the gate. Behind me, the murmurs swelled, whispers, gasps, half-finished sentences. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't check it. As I slid behind the wheel of my car, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My lips curved into a cold smile. For once, I wasn't the girl who swallowed pain. I was the woman who handed it back. Driving away, the summer night pressed close crickets loud in the fields, the air still thick with barbecue smoke and something sweeter freedom. My phone kept buzzing, screen lighting up with call after call, but I ignored it. Tonight, I had the upper hand. Tonight, I had made them see me not as their scapegoat, but as their reckoning. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what would come next. The morning after the barbecue, I woke to silence that felt almost holy. The sunlight stretched long across my kitchen table, dust motes spinning in the air. My phone sat face down, buzzing every few minutes, desperate with calls I didn't need to answer. When I finally flipped it over, the notifications scrolled endlessly: 17 missed calls from Sophie, 8 from Mom, 5 from Dad, a string of messages that shifted from outrage to panic. "You can't do this. Please, Clara, talk to us. We'll apologize. We'll fix it." I let the screen go dark again, the hum of my refrigerator louder than their words. By noon, cars pulled into my driveway. I opened the door before they could knock, letting them spill into my living room like intruders. Mom's eyes were swollen from crying, Dad's jaw set in grim determination. Sophie looked wrecked, her makeup smeared, Ethan silent at her side. Clara, Mom, began voice breaking. "You can't evict them. They have nowhere to go. Think about the family's reputation." I sat in my armchair, hands folded in my lap. "Reputation didn't matter when you laughed at me last night." Sophie's voice cracked. "I'm sorry, okay? I was drunk. I was angry. I didn't mean it." "You meant every word I said," softly. "And now you're living with the consequences." Ethan finally spoke, his voice low. "We've been saving for the wedding, not for another place. 2 weeks isn't enough." "Then you'll learn fast," I said. Dad leaned forward, his eyes cold. "This isn't like you, Clara." I smiled faintly. "Maybe you never knew me. Maybe you only knew the version of me that never said no." The argument dragged on for an hour, pleas, accusations, bargaining. They promised public apologies, begged me not to punish Ethan for Sophie's mistakes. But my decision was already locked. I'd spoken to Daniel Hayes, the lawyer I'd started seeing quietly long before the barbecue. He'd walked me through every step: the notice, the timeline, the protections. My revenge wasn't reckless. It was legal, airtight, unshakable. When they left, Sophie's sobs echoed down my driveway, but I didn't follow. I closed the door and exhaled the silence, settling like armor around me. 2 weeks later, I parked across from the apartment as Sophie and Ethan loaded their things into a rental truck, Mom and Dad hovering nearby. Their faces were tight with resentment, anger radiating like heat. They caught sight of me watching, and the glares they threw could have split stone. But I didn't flinch. By nightfall, new tenants had moved in, a young couple who paid on time, who smiled with genuine gratitude, who treated the place with respect. My plan clicked neatly into place, like gears turning in a machine I'd built myself. 6 months passed in quiet victory. I rebuilt my routines, poured myself into work-planted flowers in my backyard, and let Daniel become more than just an ally. With every rent check deposited, every bill paid without strain, I felt steadier, stronger. Then, one afternoon, an email arrived. The subject line, "I'm sorry." I almost deleted it, but curiosity won. "Clara," it read, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to apologize. I was jealous. I always have been. You were the smart one, the successful one, the one people respected. I thought tearing you down would make me feel bigger. It didn't. It only made me lose my sister. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know the truth. The wedding is smaller now, 30 people in Mom and Dad's backyard. Not what I dreamed, but maybe more real. I'd love for you to come, but I understand if you can't. Love, Sophie." I read it twice, then a third time. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a manipulation. For the first time, it was the truth. I didn't attend the wedding, but I wired her $5,000 with a note. "For what's real." See, she texted back instantly, "Thank you. This means everything." I stared at her message, unsure if the walls I'd built should come down or stay firm. For now, I left them standing. But I knew one thing: my family would never look at me the same again. They thought they'd broken me. What they didn't realize was that they'd handed me the sharpest weapon I could ever wield: the ability to say no. And I had no intention of putting it down. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, you know how sharp that silence can cut. Maybe you've been labeled the selfish one, or told to keep giving until there was nothing left of you. If that's ever happened, I want you to know you're not alone. Drop a comment below and tell me if you've ever stood your ground against people who thought they owned you. And if this story hit home, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Because this story isn't over, not for me and not for anyone who's ever had to fight for respect inside their own bloodline. Stay with me. The next chapter may be closer than you think.